Good afternoon. I'm Father William Henry Gilder, an ordained minister of the Methodist Church. I was assigned to a parish in Crosswicks, where I met and married Jane Nutt, whose family owned and lived in what is now known as the Gilder House here in Bordentown. After we were married, I bought the house from her family. We were both activists, writers, and often worked behind the scenes. So what's so special about our house? Well, I like to think our family embodied a sense of commitment to social equality, encouragement, and caring for people as well as the environment. You know, during the Civil War, we did not openly proclaim that our home, the Gilder House, was a stop on the Underground Railroad, yet we hid enslaved people seeking a free life before the Emancipation Proclamation was officially declared. Our family itself was like a quiet channel, a connection of people intertwining to forge a significant but sometimes sort of unconventional yet influential community. Our Gilder family spirit permeated a sense of compassionate wonder, I'd like to think. I also like to think that our family all shared a sense of warm-hearted, creative power. Our children, they were all amazing. But it was Watsy, my son, Richard Watson Gilder, who was born upstairs in this Bordentown house in 1844 and returned regularly to our country home, which we aptly named Bellevue, or Beautiful Sight. Our family was of modest means, and we worked to provide for each other. I think we were known for our honest, industrious commitment through which we enabled people to be their best selves. And we supported movements to stimulate the higher good for our country. Through Watsy's influence and his talents, he was in a position of being able to foster writing and to expedite liaisons that were not limited to local areas, but that had impacts on the world community. I, unfortunately, did not live long enough to thank Richard or tell him how proud I was of him, or any of my wonderfully gifted children. I loved my family, but I still felt a strong call to serve, to help end this horrendous conflict which was dividing our nation. Our second eldest son, William Henry, had already enlisted as a private, and he was stationed in the 40th Regiment of New York. He ended up on the staff of General Thomas Egan. I volunteered as a chaplain in the very same regiment, working with the sick and injured soldiers in the platoon of infirmary. It was there that I contracted smallpox, which was unexpectedly fatal. I was only 51 years old when I died in Brandy Station, Virginia. My wife, Jane, was left to fend for herself and our 6 children. John Francis became a composer and a pianist. William Henry Jr. was an explorer. Richard Watson was a poet and editor. Jeanette, a journalist, and Martina and Elmira, they were married mothers and had dedicated to their families. Robert Fletcher was a journeyman and an artist, and Joseph Benson was an editor. I'm proud and impressed with all of our offspring, but I would like to have stayed with them longer. Joseph, the youngest, was only 6 when I passed. At the age of only 20, Richard Watson needed to suspend his college studies to help his family after my death in 1864. In order to support and assist the family, Watsy applied for a job as a paymaster on the Camden and Amboy Railroad. However, he was too young and unaccustomed to being in the position of being unarmed and carrying cash, and too inexperienced to continue for more than a year. It was after that unsuccessful job encounter that Watsy began his career in journalism. He spent time interviewing politicians and researching material for his reports. This is how his motivation to reform worthy causes took root. His accomplishments were as varied as providing research, information, and advocating for prison reform to granting a charter for the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. And of course, his job also required analyzing and reviewing books on a regular basis. I think it's significant that we're meeting my son, Richard Watson, now. You know, we live in such similar times. People need to be uplifted and invigorated with wisdom. In his lifetime, he attempted to consult, advise, and listen to powerful people from all walks of life. He was not only a humanitarian, but a successful and sensitive editor of the Century, which later became Scribner's, a prestigious New York publication. He was a writer, a poet, and a confidant to influential people like Grover Cleveland and Theodore Roosevelt. You know, there's a lot to learn about a person through the friendships that they keep. So what did Richard Watson have in common with his confidants? Obviously, he was a poet, a writer, so the connection to literary comrades was evident, especially since he had access to publishing and promoting their work as well. Watson received his LL.D. degree, which is a Doctor of Law, from Dickinson College in 1883. His friends, Ralph Waldo Emerson and Walt Whitman, were prominent in the Transcendental movement to promote the concept of individualism, idealism, and the divinity of nature. But that was just the beginning. He founded the Newark Morning Register, where he was editor, publisher, marketer, and opinion columnist. His column, The Old Cabinet, referred to an 8-foot-high mahogany cabinet owned by his great-grandfather and given to him by his dear Aunt Maria. He was the founder of the Anti-Spoils League and a co-founder of the International Copyright League, the Authors Club, and the Society of American Architects, just to name some of his more diversified accomplishments. Though Watson's writing was not part of the fireside poets, he was always in that arena. These are the only poets of that time that rivaled the popularity of British poets like Wordsworth and Coleridge. Watson was constantly seeking to elevate the people in his neighborhood through his circle of friends. You know, life was not easy in those times. Watson was very instrumental in the encouragement of artists, poets, and people seeking positive change to have an impact on everyday lives. I'm so grateful that my Gilder family were all striving to take people to a more positive level through art and poetry and involvement with the environment. They were committed to every aspect of the vitalization of these values. From the friendships Richard nurtured, it can be deduced the qualities he identified with as a person. The network of presidential kinship is more complicated. These include honesty, respect for individual integrity, and a sense of fairness.
Richard Watson Gilder, known in my family as Watsy, was my father. Dad was first and foremost a writer. As his daughter, I retrieved letters he wrote throughout his lifetime, even documenting his Civil War efforts in the Battle of Gettysburg. He wrote and he wrote and he wrote. Dad enlisted with the 1st Philadelphia Battery under Captain James Parker Landis. Since he was only 19 years old, he needed parental consent to join the war effort. My grandfather was away with the Army of the Potomac, and my grandmother was not easy to convince to sign the permit. But she did sign, under the premise that this particular battalion, composed of lawyers and professional men, would be delivering field fortifications rather than participate in artillery. My father had become a member of the cadet militia in Bordentown and enjoyed the military interaction. He wrote us recollections of his compatriots, hurriedly working at night, after digging to add depth to the trenches and height to the walls of the battlefields.
It was the Gettysburg summer. There was great excitement in Philadelphia at the approach of the rebels. There was a great commotion, and it seemed to me a good time to go to war. I was underage, but 19, and I could not go without the written permission of my parents. My father was serving with the Army of the Potomac, and my mother was induced to consent to my going because I had convinced her that the battery to which I desired to enlist, namely the 1st Philadelphia Artillery commanded by Captain Landis, would build fortifications rather than be in the field. My mother was loath to sign the permit, but finally consented. The date of my enrollment was June 24th, 1863. Our battery was rather a tenderfoot organization, consisting largely of lawyers and professional men in general. Charles G. Leland and his brother were, like myself, privates in the company. We went in cattle cars to Harrisburg and crossed the river to the fort on the southern side of the Susquehanna. When we were told to break step in marching across the bridge, I had the feeling that indeed this was war, because I had heard that it was necessary for troops not to march as usual in crossing a bridge on account of the danger from the vibration that would take place. We went out to what was called Fort Couch on Hummel's Height. The fortifications were not complete when we arrived, and there was always lingered in my memory the picturesque scene of our working hurriedly in the trenches at night to send the wall higher and make the trench deeper. It was, in my mind, a truly military picture. The more military the situation, of course, the better I was pleased. Military scenes were by no means unfamiliar to me, as I had myself been a member of the Cadet Militia Company in Bordentown. I was 3rd Sergeant and Secretary, as I remember. I had seen many troops in different places, but this new experience of being part of the war itself, actually enlisted in the services of the United States, was a constant source of interest and inspiration. I must now tell how I came to be number 1 on our gun. I'd never been trained in the artillery manual, although I know the infantry manual at arms quite well. Being a youth and slight, I was not at once detailed to go up to the battlements and take my place with the older men. One day, I was sitting in my tent at Fort Couch, and an officer who happened to pass found me crying. He asked me what was the matter, and I blurted out that I wanted to go front. He replied, "Oh well, we can settle that very soon." So he had me detailed for the purpose. When I got up to the line of fortifications, I was so delighted at being led to take right hold as a full-blown soldier that I suppose I was a pretty apt pupil, and my former training with small arms made me able quickly to learn the new drill. So much so that one of the officers came to me and asked if I would take charge of a gun. I told him that I thought it would be very rash to have one so inexperienced responsible for a gun. So instead I was made number 1 of the squad that had charge of our gun and went through the campaign in that capacity. Soon we started southward on the heels of the rebels. We were pretty close to them and constantly came upon the hoofprints of their horses. When we got within 2 or 3 miles of Carlisle, we were permitted to halt and rest. While thus resting, I saw a horseman dash up the road from Carlisle, and in a flash, we were mounted on the caissons and going like mad toward the town. I shall never forget that ride. The springless gun carriages leapt into the air at every bump and rut in the road, and we had to hang on for dear life. Such banging and thumping and tossing I never had before, nor have I known anything like it since. It did not take us long to get into the city, but to our amazement, instead of rebs, we found a coalition in the marketplace. Men and women had turned out to make us welcome. Among the good things to eat were some raw onions. I'd never eaten a whole raw onion before, but they tickled my soldier appetite. Memorable onions, mixed in my mind with burning buildings and exploding shells. While I was quietly munching, I heard a fearful cry. "The rebels are coming up that street." In an instant we had flown, each man to his place. I mounted my caisson, our gun dashed round two sides of the square, and then careened to the center of the crossroads. In another moment, I was on my feet, driving a cannonball into the gun with great enthusiasm and with the agile assistance of number 2. In as little time as I can tell, it was a change of scene. Men, women, children hurrying through the square to seek a place of refuge. Once all the civilians had fled from sight, the rebel shells were flying over our heads. Then a horse and a horseman came up the street blindfolded, carrying the flag of truce. We heard afterward that he had demanded of our general, William F. Smith, known as Baldy Smith, the surrender of the town. And Baldy told him that if they wanted it, they can come and take it. A little longer, and the flag of truce had disappeared. What happened? When we came to Chambersburg, I had time to write several letters, of which I found afterward that a number had been saved, and I gave them here. The first is addressed to my mother, in answer to one of hers, in which she evidently had expressed a sort of remorse at having signed the paper to let me go into the campaign. What amazing conceit of youth! I actually read her a lecture in patriotism. She, with a husband and another son already in the army, she whose daily life was a sacrifice. I remain your loving son, Watsy.
It's all about making connections that change the world. Dad became acquainted with wrongs that needed to be righted, changes that would have made the world a more equitable environment for the working class, as well as the plant and creature inhabitants of the land. In January 1890, he wrote to Maurice Egan, minister and diplomat to Denmark. That I am drawn into too many things is perhaps true, although I am constantly fighting invitations and trying to avoid public engagements. I will give you a sample evening. Last Thursday, I dined at home. Like a good citizen, I went to a ballot reform meeting. I went to Cooper Union and heard some speeches long enough to have my name counted on the right side. Like a good neighbor, I went to see Mr. Drake, who was under the weather. Like a good husband, I went home and spent the rest of the evening at my own house. Like a good poet, I wrote a poem on Browning to be read at the memorial meeting in Boston. Like a good editor, I read manuscripts and went to bed sometime before midnight, having had time to chat with the family, take a cup of tea with Mrs. Foots, who was staying with us, and have a good time generally. And that is the way it goes. My dad had a gift of putting together individuals who, with their combined expertise, were able to devise solutions to complex issues. Dad suffered heart problems, rheumatic accompaniments, nights without sleep. A fearful attack of sciatica left him weak and, as he said, only half himself. According to one of his letters, he said, and I quote, "I have promised H and my doctors to reform and be selfish in my old age." This was in the summer of 1891. Yet 12 years later, he was still passionate and exerting energy for positive social change. My father gave a number of addresses during the winter of 1903. In January, he spoke on tenement house reform. In March, he addressed the Browning Society of Philadelphia on Emerson. In April, he discussed the subject of literature and diplomacy before the Author Club of New York. In June, he gave the commencement address at Wellesley on the subject of ideals of life, and in the same month read his poem on John Wesley on the 200th anniversary of the birth of the founder of Methodism. Finally, in July, he spoke on kindergartens before the National Education Association's annual meeting in Boston. He believed, plant a free kindergarten in any quarter of the overcrowded metropolis, and you've begun then and there the work of making better lives, better homes, better citizens, and a better city. These hurried trips away from his home were stressful. Dad was apparently ill for 2 weeks, suffered a slight heart attack while giving a lecture, but it was not considered serious. He died unexpectedly on November 19th, 1909. He was 65. Upon his death, Theodore Roosevelt wrote about him as, and I quote, "one of the truest, most delightful of friends. He combined courage, idealism, and wholesome common sense. No worthier American citizen has lived during our time," end quote. The confidants of Richard Watson Gilder were artists, writers, environmentalists, political activists. As Gilders, we were all dedicated, versatile, influential, and creative people. We did live in trying times as well. This close community in Bordentown is the resting place of many of our Gilder family members. The Bordentown Cemetery is now our home. The house on Crosswick Street was gifted to the city of Bordentown by our family in 1935. It is our fondest dream to keep the dreams and humanitarian work of our family alive through visits to this home. Let it inspire, be a sort of lighthouse, a beacon of hope, and to be a reminder of the amazing potential that can be reached by a family that started with a man, a woman, and their sons and daughters. Thank you so much for listening.